topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, which is home base for me. If we've not met yet or you don't know me, I'm a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose. My team and I help companies to detect and articulate their purpose, to thread it through culture and operations. We work with forward-reaching organizations to develop inspirational leaders who create cultures where people actually want to come to work and do their best. And we provide programs that enable individual team members and leaders to discover and unleash their passion and purpose at work to catalyze fulfillment, engagement, and productivity. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Also, if you like the content of the show, you may also be interested in my next book, due out in March 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. You can pre-order your copy at bookshop.org or barnesandnoble.com. Now, let's get back into our program. With us today is Dr. Robin Short. She's the founder and CEO of Workplace Peace Institute, an organization developing consulting, leadership training, and research firm that brings peace and dignity to the workplace. She also works as a peace-building trainer, mediator, racial equity consultant, and restorative justice facilitator. Dr. Short is the founder and board chair of the Peace and Conciliation Project, a 501c3 anti-racism organization that brings communities together to address and repair the harm of racial justice. We'll be talking today about why peace is important and the promise of it in our times, how a lack of peace shows up in the workplace, and what leaders can do to build cultures of peace. She joins us today from Dallas as well. Dr. Short, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Me too. And look at this beautiful thing you brought into this world, this book. It's just so gorgeous and just chock full of really interesting and useful information. I got a lot out of it. So we want to talk over what's in there and the work that you're doing. So first, I got to know, this is a pretty special niche. My niche is meaning and purpose. Yours is peace. How did you get interested in working with peace? What's your background?
So, I think my interest in working in peace really started in childhood. And it's taken me some time as an adult to really unpack and explore how my path ended up going in this direction. But there were two core things that were happening for me as a young person, like 8 years old, 12 years old. And one was I lived in a family of origin that did not handle conflict well. I didn't have conflict competent parents, as many of us didn't. And so conflict was very destructive. It was very scary. And it led me to become conflict avoidant because it triggered a lot of fear inside of me. And avoiding conflict tends to just actually create more conflict. So it's not a healthy coping mechanism. The other thing that was happening simultaneously as a child is that my parents gave us an enormous amount of freedom as children. And I sometimes joke that we were feral children, but I think now we're actually called free range children. And it's like we had this ability to, like many of us did growing up, in the 70s and 80s. We roamed the neighborhood. We had a lot of freedom in our lives. But my parents, when I was in the third grade, decided to teach us at home. And that was a really radical thing in 1981. No one was really doing that. And so there wasn't a model for how to do it. And what my parents did, and what my mother primarily did, is she created, well, she enrolled us in a correspondence course. So we had, but instead of structuring our days and giving us assignments on what needed to be done each day, she gave us assignments for these are the things you must achieve in the week. And you have an enormous amount of freedom about how you go about achieving these things. So we were held responsible for outcome and deliverables, but we had enormous freedom on how we went about doing that. So if I woke up on a Monday and said, I want to go to the zoo, we went to the zoo. The rule was you couldn't roll over Sunday and bring work with you. So you had to accomplish what you were assigned in that week. And what I experienced in that is freedom and justice in terms of being given the resources necessary for me to thrive and achieve my potential. I experienced identity in this from the perspective of a competent learner, a self-directed learner. I experienced participation and self-fulfillment and a strong sense of belonging of who I was in the family system as someone who could be trusted. And these were just really normal experiences for me as a young person. And then when I went into, and I was able to really sustain that when I went back into public school and high school, really because I just broke a lot of rules and,
I'll bet.
didn't care. And then I went into the workplace, and it was very much stay in your lane, bring the contributions that fit your job description and absolutely nothing else. You must be here between these particular times, even if you're more productive in other hours of the day. There was so much control that was baked into how we're supposed to show up in the workplace that I think a lot of people coming into their first jobs were accustomed to, because it's what we had been conditioned for throughout our whole educational experience. But I had been conditioned with something really different. And it took me many years to be able to name the things that I was experiencing as actual basic human needs and as actual expressions of dignity. But my body was registering the violation of not having those things in the workplace. And so I think that because I had not been well assimilated into a traditional structure that is what formal education looks like and what is mirrored in the workplace, I struggled in the workplace a lot. And at first I thought, oh, I just don't have the emotional intelligence skills or the personality for this. But what I came to realize was I like everyone else, I'm having chronic violations of basic human needs and dignity needs. And I'm not thriving, and I'm not bringing my best to the workplace, and I'm not contributing at the level that I want to contribute at, because I'm so busy in my own emotional labor, which I think is nothing special. There was nothing special about what I was experiencing. It was just in so much contrast to what I had experienced previously as a young person. And so I began to, after I kind of jumped ship from the traditional work environment pretty quickly and became an entrepreneur. And eventually I had a marketing and communications company, and I sold my agency to another marketing communications agency and went to go work for a larger firm. And that is where I, now am a full grown adult working back in a traditional work environment. And it became really clear, no, this isn't me. This is the traditional workplace. And I think that we can and should do better. And so I really went on a path of exploring what it is we need as humans to thrive. And for me, that's peace and dignity.
Okay, Robin, that was a fantastic, incredible opening. Now, a couple things, listeners and viewers, how many of you can relate to what she's saying here? I mean, I can tell you, for me too, that whole control thing, derriere, staple it into the seat thing doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for a lot of other people as well. That book that I mentioned in the intro, The Great Revitalization, also talks about what's happening. What do people want today? Dignity is beautiful, and so is peace. So I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing, Robin. So glad you're here. Yes, we need to help create workplaces where people can thrive and they want to be. So I'm so happy to have you on. And that brings us to the next place. Since we've been talking about peace, this is the central focus of your work. I think it's important for you to actually define by what you mean by peace.
Sure. Thank you for that. So when I really began my pursuit of exploring what peace looks like, and what it really means for us as human beings, there wasn't a definition that I landed on that really resonated with what I was looking for. It's not yoga. It's not mindfulness practices. It's not serenity. All of those things are wonderful. The definition of peace that guides my work is that peace is human security and the ability to live a life of dignity that's free of fear. And so human security is the actualization of our basic human needs on a consistent basis. Dignity is our ability to experience our inherent worth and value as human beings, and to do so without fear of that being taken from us.
So I'm going to just go out on a limb here, Robin, and I'm going to guess that a few people that are listening to the show right now just got moved to tears because they don't experience that, and they would love to experience that. So now let's take this into this next place, that you have a promise in your book that is so beautiful. Let's put this out here. You say, and I quote, "For the first time in human history, people have access to the knowledge, skills, and intellectual capacity to choose their destiny by intentionally shaping their own individual development rather than reactively evolving to changes in their environment." Yes, please.
Yes. What I find so exciting about where we are as humans and the history of a human development is that from an evolutionary perspective, we have evolved as a species, just like all species evolve in reaction to their environment. But what we now know through neuroscience is that we can change our brain. We are not. There is not a destiny that we're enslaved to. We have the capacity to actually build new neural pathways in our brain, to learn new information, to continuously evolve and change, and to be proactive about our evolution, both as human beings, like in my individual life, but collectively as a species. And it really only requires that we seek that education, right? That we actually learn that information, grow those skills and competencies, and then put them into practice. And on an individual level, I think about it a little bit like a tango or a two-step. If one of us is really intentionally doing that work, those around us in our immediate relationships, they'll do the dance with us because we're leading so well. But if we do this collectively as a human species, um, we're immensely powerful.
Mhm. Okay, and that's why, of course, why both of us are really in a capacity to help to teach, right? To help grow and coach people into this capacity, which brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which I think is really, really interesting. This whole notion of we have to get present to what's happening, how we're going about things in the world. So one of the things you also talk about in the book, you say that destructive conflict in the workplace is most likely not a result of people choosing to cause harm, but rather individuals causing harm because they have not developed the tools to behave differently, starting with even an understanding of what they're actually putting out into the world. So I think that's really important to talk about. We're not talking about people that are necessarily overtly trying to be, shall we say, beasts, but they're unknowing as to their actions, and they're not aware how to change yet.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a bit to just this, the promise to this, the opportunity here?
Yes. So, I think about relationships that I've had, and I think this is probably something we're going to talk about a little bit later on in this episode, is about people who behave in bullying manners. And I had an experience with someone who probably was my greatest teacher. He was the most intense bully I have ever experienced in my life. And it became really clear to me that this was behavior he had learned. This was what had been modeled for him. It worked in terms of he got short-term results, but also high turnover in the workplace. But it was the skill he had. He wasn't inherently evil. I don't think he cared tremendously one way or the other about me, but meaning like I don't think he wanted the very best for me, but I don't think he cared terribly if there was harm, but the behavior was what worked. It was what he knew how to do. And I remember the moment that I realized this relationship that we're having, this toxic relationship where you do terrible things to me and I become wounded, is an actual relationship. And I don't have to show up as the victim. I can show up differently and change the dynamics of the relationship. But it requires that I see him as someone who's simply trying to get his basic human needs met, someone who's trying to experience his worth and value, and not having the skills to do it in such a way that it's pro-social. And if I can show up differently in this relationship and he can still get his needs met, we don't have to be in this harmful experience with one another. And there's power for me and there's choice for me in that relationship if I'm willing to see he's doing the exact same thing I'm doing. One of us just has more skills.
Okay, so that is incredible. And there's grace in that, Robin. There's grace in that. There's opportunity. There's an invitation to grow. There's an invitation to change. There's an invitation to take responsibility for our reaction and our place in these things. And I, of course, stand for all of that. And so in relation to that, I think it's important that since we're talking about peace, that we also really talk more about what we mean and the role of conflict. So I like what you have in here in your book, that you have a quote from the Dalai Lama that says, quote, "Peace does not mean an absence of conflict. Differences will always be there. Peace means solving these differences through peaceful means, through dialogue, education, knowledge, and through humane ways." So I think that is really, really important because it's what you're speaking to. We can get there if we're willing to work at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Conflict is, if you think about the way you started fire, like conflict is friction that leads to a transformation of energy. And it can be a destructive fire or it can be a helpful fire. But the conflict, that friction is always going to exist. And if we're able to channel it in such a way where we honor our basic human needs and our inherent worth and value in each stage of that process, then conflict makes us healthier, stronger, more creative, more capable of trusting one another. When we do hard things together in a way that is that is not harmful, we actually grow our trust of one another. And those hard things become less scary because we know we can do it. In so many ways, conflict has the capacity to increase all the goodness we're looking for, both in terms of our relationships and the thing we've come together to do, if we can do it well.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
And
Great.
The world with the skills to do it well. We must learn them.
Yes, I agree. That's why I wanted to have you on the show to spread this important word. A great way to send us into our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Dr. Robin Short, the founder and CEO of Workplace Peace Institute, an organization developing consulting, leadership training, and research firm that brings peace and dignity to the workplace. We've been talking a bit about peace as a promise and what it takes to achieve. After the break, we're going to get into the problems in the workplace when it's absent. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us. Before we get back into the program, I'd like to invite you to check out my book. It's called Purpose Ignited: How Inspiring Leaders Unleash Passion and Elevate Cause. It's on Amazon. I wrote it to awaken readers to their passion and purpose and start them down the path of turning them into inspirational leaders. So I hope you'll check it out and see if it works for you. If you're just joining us now, my guest is Dr. Robin Short. She's the founder and CEO of Workplace Peace Institute. which is a consulting, leadership training, and research firm that brings peace and dignity to the workplace. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this next bit here, I wanted to talk about really helping our listeners and viewers to really start to recognize that maybe they aren't working in an organization that has peace, or it's toxic, or whatever you might want to call it, or however it might present itself. And to start with this segment, I think it's really interesting what you say in your book here. This is really explains so much, Robin. You say, because American culture does not value the expressions of emotions, most people have an underdeveloped feelings vocabulary, meaning most people literally do not have the language to describe their feelings. And the language that does exist is often feelings prohibitive. So expressing feelings in the workplace is often perceived as weak and unprofessional. This is so true. And so wrong and backwards.
Mm-hmm. 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 It is wrong and backwards. Most of us who have been raised or worked in Western culture for the majority of our lives have been conditioned to leave our feelings at the door, mm-hmm. which is actually physiologically impossible. So as humans, we are actually wired, we are hardwired, programmed to feel and then think. So our feelings shape the thoughts that are going to come next and then our behaviors, not the other way around. We don't think and then have a feeling and then have a behavior. We feel, it informs what we think, and then we behave. But we've been conditioned to believe that the actual way that we're wired is weak. And that has a whole lot of tropes that come with it, depending on what identity group you're associated with. But if you're a woman, if you're a white woman, it's often, the trope is often around hysterical or irrational. If you're a Black woman, the trope is often you're angry. But there's all sorts of stereotypes that we don't want to be put in. And so we shut our feelings down so that we are not seen in this, not put in this box that we're going to have a really hard time getting ourselves out of. And in the process, we're actually shutting down the very thing inside of our brain that's informing the way that we think. And we've not developed the language to be able to accurately name what I'm feeling. So in the book, I share a framework developed by a psychologist by the name of Marshall Rosenberg called nonviolent communication. When I'm working with people in the workplace, I tend to call it compassionate communication, because just the word nonviolent, I think, can get people a little bit triggered. But what it's designed to do is to create honesty in our communication and empathy in our communication. And so the process starts with simply stating what you observe without judging it. So Robin was late 3 times last week is the actual fact, versus what we tend to do, which is Robin's so rude, she never shows up on time. So now I've evaluated and judged that behavior. But if I can just state, this is what I observed, and this is the way that it made me feel, and really dig into what those feelings were: frustrated, anxious, disrespected, worried. Like, there's a whole lot of different feelings that emerge from that. Then it leads us to the next step, which is, what is the need that's underneath that? And when I'm teaching the framework or using the framework, I go a little bit deeper than what Marshall Rosenberg does. And I really ask people, look at the basic human needs, dig really deep and find the basic human need that wasn't being met. Was it your need for love, for belonging, for fulfillment, for security, for acceptance of identity, for fairness? Like, really dig deeper into the need, because that's going to help you make a good request for how something can be different. If we don't have the ability to name the feeling, we won't be able to find the need. And we'll be trapped in the accusation language that gets us into disputes with one another. But the neuroscience behind this that I find super interesting, and you know this because you read the book, I spent a whole chapter talking about neuroscience, because all of us are running around on autopilot, right? We've got this machine that's driving our behavior and we don't know the first thing about it. And if we really want to be in control of our destiny, we need to know what that machine is that's driving our human behavior and realize that we can make some shifts in it. So the interesting thing about this is that what neuroscience tells us is that when our brain brings stimulus in from the environment, we see something, we observe something, we hear something, the very first place it kind of, I call it a drive-by. The very first stop it makes is to the amygdala. And the amygdala is the area of the brain that's sole job is to keep you safe. And the amygdala either says, yep, you're safe, I'm green lighting you into other areas of the brain for higher level functioning, or no, you're not safe, and I'm going to give you all the resources that you need to get to safety. And the interesting thing about the amygdala is that it's the oldest part of the brain from an evolutionary perspective, and it doesn't have the ability to instantaneously recognize the difference between physical safety and psychological safety. So when we experience a dignity violation, which is any behavior in which we perceive that our inherent worth and value, our identity, isn't being honored and respected, the amygdala says, not safe. And now we have thinking that happens. And then we have behavior that shows up. So if I don't have the language to name the feeling, I'm going to go with what my amygdala is telling me, which is that I'm not safe. And it may actually not be true. But I'm going to act as though it is. And then we get ourselves into these really difficult disputes. And we are constantly then in this ping pong back and forth between people's behavior. And we're not really digging deeper to get curious about what's driving it.
Extremely well articulated, Robin. You're just, gosh, that's just, you rendered so much great information in a short amount of time. Beautiful. So really quick, on my work, I'm helping to develop inspirational leaders. So much of what I'm also doing there, Robin, is helping them to feel again, helping them to feel those good feelings of empowerment, engagement, being able to serve other people, to be proud. I mean, that's so much of what I'm doing when I'm helping to develop those kind of people through the inspirational piece. So interesting that we're working on similar energies here. I want to talk about bullying next. This is something that, right, I think most people who are listening to this have probably heard bullying, know something about bullying, but the way you talk about it in your book is really quite, shall we say, arresting. And when you say, when a person assumes control over a person's livelihood through bullying behavior, which occurs, you say, in 72% of the workplace bullying situations, he or she has significant leverage to cause financial pain. And then you go on to say, and this was so just scary for me. You say that understandably single parent workers are the most vulnerable to being bullied. That just breaks my heart.
It's really terrible. So I want to start with this in talking about this, is that I try to be really, really careful about people first language and refer to these folks who are demonstrating bullying behavior as people who are demonstrating bullying behavior, because I know they have the capacity to change.
I love that.
We tend to say the bully did this, the bully did that, and we're putting them inside of a really difficult box they can't get out of. And if we put them in this box they can't get out of, we also can't be in relationship with them. Something I was thinking about when you were talking about your own work with leaders is somewhere along the way in this American experience, we came to believe that we as individuals are all that we have, and that I need to look out for myself, and that the only thing I am responsible for is my own behavior. And the truth is, as human beings, we're deeply connected and we're deeply reliant on one another, and nothing works without relationship. And we've been conditioned to break that relationship. So these people who are leading with bullying behaviors, we're in relationship with them. And I may not ever be able to shift that relationship. And I might. be able to shift that relationship. I don't know, but if I put them in the box, they're never getting out of it in the relationship with me. So one of the things that is so alarming and, as you said, arresting about the way that these folks are showing up in the workplace is that people get in conflict with their own basic human needs. So all of us, every human being needs love and belonging and fulfillment and participation and justice and cultural security and safety. But they're not hierarchical in terms of our pursuit for them. But I do have to pay the mortgage. I do have to keep my kid in school. I do have to put food on the table. And so my ability to remain employed, which is the basic human need of security, begins to be prioritized over my need for fairness and belonging and justice. And as human beings, we can't trade like that. So as we begin to trade those basic human needs by the pure situation, right? Not because we're choosing to, we become wounded, right? So the science behind that is that we stay in a chronic state of our amygdala telling us that we're not safe. And that means we stay in a chronic state of an over flooding of cortisol into our blood system, which causes inflammation, which causes a whole host of disease. So it ultimately ends up really harming us. So we need to be, and we should be, incentivized to be the lead dancer in that tango and to try to shape that relationship differently. And if we do so with the belief that this person is doing the best that they can with the skills that they have, then we create opportunity for those skills to change. And I often find myself being really cautious and careful in this conversation because the harm that's happening is real. The person who's being victimized is being victimized, and it isn't their fault. Very clearly, it isn't their fault. But we do have power. And the more we seek to lean into that power, and the more that we see these other folks as the human that they are with dignity needs, then the more able we are to begin to shift that relationship. The person that was bullying me, it was such an intense level of bullying that I got really, really sick at a corporate trip. And the first thing that crossed my mind was that he had drugged me. Whether he drugged me or not, I have no idea, but bizarre that it would ever cross my mind that he did. It was inside the realm of things that seemed possible. By the time I left that organization, I wouldn't call him a friend, but I would call him someone I was capable of working really well with. And so it did change because I saw him as a human doing the best he had with the skills that he had. And so if I could help him grow those skills, then it would improve my relationship, would improve my life.
That opens so much up, Robin. That is so beautiful. Also a great way for us to go on to the next break here. And listeners and viewers, as we go into this next break, I'd like you to reflect on what she just said. There's so much power in your own capacity to be able to dance in that relationship and help teach other people as well as yourself. That's so beautiful. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Dr. Robin Short. She's the founder and CEO of Workplace Peace Institute, a consulting, leadership training, and research firm that brings peace and dignity to the workplace. We've been talking a bit about how toxicity and other things show up in the workplace and how peace can actually help solve that. After the break, we're going to get into how we can create cultures of peace. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at EliseCortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. One other bit of news I want to share with you is that my second book, Passionately Striving and Why, came out in August of last year. And I'd love for you to check that out. What I did was I went around the globe, well, from the position of my internet, and I found 25 women to share their very intimate stories of how they discovered their purpose and are now serving from it. So it's meant to be educational, inspirational. We have stories from Australia to Zambia. If you're just joining the program today, my guest is Dr. Robin Short. She is the founder and CEO of Workplace Peace Institute and the author of Peace in the Workplace, Transforming Conflict into Collaboration, which is what we've been talking about. So for this last segment here, I think we made it very clear, Robin, about the opportunity to be able to address and to be able to elevate peace in the workplace. Now I want to talk a little bit more about how the listeners and viewers can actually pull it off. So you say in the book, you say that senior leadership must adopt the identity of a peacemaker and assume the responsibilities that come with the role seriously. And you offer 5 tenets for them to get going down the path. I'd love to talk about each of those 5, starting with the first one, model the way.
Mm-hmm. So model the way. I think that leaders need to have a real paradigm shift when they think about what their role as leader is. We have traditionally been conditioned to see leadership as the most strategic thinker, the subject matter expert, the highest performer, the key delegator, the person who sits at the top who has all the power. And I think the research produced by Gallup year over year shows us that that is not producing good results, right? We are consistently stuck at a 33% employee engagement rate. The flip side of that number is that we are consistently trapped at nearly 70% of the organization is actively disengaged. So the leadership style that we've all been taught is simply not working. So when I think about leaders taking the role of peacemaker really seriously, it is assuming the role of high proficiency and knowledge and understanding of human behavior and what is necessary for people to thrive and actualize their potential, which cannot exist without the consistent realization of basic human needs and dignity needs. So the leader as peacemaker is the most proficient in human behavior, has the highest level conflict engagement skills, is the very best dialogue facilitator, knows how to bring people together, and sees that as their most important role.
Mm-hmm. So I love what you're saying here, Robin. So in my next book coming out, The Great Revitalization, one of the things I talk about in chapter 8 is that your organization, anyone's organization, will never be able to evolve past that level of the leader. So wherever the leader's consciousness level is as far as the organization can get. And you're just now speaking to that beautifully. Mm-hmm. So then your second tenet is to inspire a shared vision. Of course, you know I love that and align with that.
Yes. And so getting very, very clear on the vision of the organization as an organization that's highly, highly prioritizing and focusing on the peace and dignity needs of the whole ecosystem. So the employees, the customers, all stakeholders, and even the folks that we have traditionally thought of as our competitors, that we begin to see them as co-conspirators in the work that we're doing and not as competition of heads we need to step on and shares we need to take.
Right. My friend Paul Skinner wrote a book called Collaborative Advantage, and I had him on air talking about it. And so just speaking to that, I love that co-conspirator. That's just beautiful. I think he would like that too. And then the third tenet, challenge the process.
Yes, to accept, something that I talk with my clients about all the time is that we need a paradigm shift in organizational structure, that this steep hierarchy is it doesn't work well. And when you think about those folks who are doing the real work, who are closest to the problems, their wisdom is very rarely tapped. And most of us, when we open today's show talking about how we come into the workplace and we're only allowed to contribute the thing that sits inside our job description, and we have so many, like we are these just wildly multidimensional human beings with all these skill sets, and we're literally not allowed to bring them to the workplace if they are outside of the job description. So challenging the process is really being willing to upend the paradigm, to redistribute power, to prioritize collaborative decision making, and to really genuinely empower those people closest to the problem to be able to be closest to the solution and make those decisions, which I think is really uncomfortable for traditional leaders, because they then go, but then what's my role? Your role is to be the peacemaker.
And create that place where there can be peace, right?
Mhm.
Well, what you just set up there to me, Robin, speaks beautifully to your fourth tenet, which is to enable others to act. If you do all that you did, what you said before, then you can actually enable them to act.
Mhm. Yes, and trust them. Like, there have been, this was difficult for me when I was younger, and it has become much, much easier for me now. But there are times where people on my team are going to make a decision that's different from mine. And I've learned to take on the role of advisor. Let me advise you on what I've experienced. Let me advise you on how I project things may go. Let me offer my advice. This is your decision. You get to make that decision. And what I've learned is it usually works out really, really well. Like, the way that I was going to do it was not the only way to do it.
Right.
And so I don't even want to use the word allow, because there's such a power dynamic in that. But when we bring those people together on a project, and then allow everyone to be their fullest selves, it works. It just does.
Yes. Well, and as you know, what am I out for? I'm out to create workplaces where people can actually realize their potential through the experience of work.
Mhm.
So
Right.
we're lockstep on this. And the last thing you said totally again also supports the fifth tenet, which is encourage the heart.
Mhm. I have literally started telling my colleagues and clients that I love them, because I do,
Mhm.
and they love me back. And we have normalized actually saying, "I love you, and I love you too," and that should not be radical.
No, it should not.
Like, we show up for people that we love and for people who love us. And it should be the most natural thing in the world to love those people who are doing work with us.
Mm. You'll be glad to know, Robin, I had a Roger Steinkruger on my show several weeks back. He was in the healthcare field for 50 years, the last 25 years of which he spent as a CEO. And he says the exact same thing. He tells people I love them. He told me in the second, I think, time or third time that he met me in one of our kind of a group sessions that we do with Lance Secreton. And I have to say, didn't know what to do with that, because
Mhm.
I would know what to do with it if you told me,
Uh-huh.
but I didn't know what to do with it with somebody that I just met. And frankly, because he was a man, it was a little bit different
Yep.
for me. And I
Yep.
really loved how he normalized that. And,
Mhm.
over the course of his career. So it's happening, Robin. It really is
Mhm.
happening.
Mhm. Do you know there has never been a single time in any organization that I was an employee of where I believed anyone loved me?
Wow. That is a statement. Mm. And think about the opposite of that. When you actually do feel that someone, even just one person in the organization loves you, what a difference that experience is.
Yep. Yep.
We have just a few minutes left here. Then I want to be able to talk about some of the conflict resolution techniques that you talk about having great promise and to create more peaceful work environments, especially as it relates to this idea of compassionate communication and creating nonviolent interest-based resolution for workplace conflict. So if you would you just talk about a few of them, starting with mediation?
Mhm. So mediation is a process where someone is facilitating a dialogue that is intended to ultimately reach agreement, and it empowers the two people to come to that agreement together. And I think we really need mediation in the workplace as a regular conflict resolution tool. Very, very early in my career, I worked in education, and I was the school director of a Montessori school. And Montessori schools teach children to be fully engaged in conflict resolution, and they have what they call a peace table. And someone, if there's a conflict between two children, one child will invite the other child to the peace table. They have a talking piece and they work it out together. And they don't have to escalate their conflict to a person inside the organization who holds more power to be an arbiter of what the outcome is going to be. And most of us went to traditional schools where we escalated our conflicts up to someone who dictated that down what the outcome was going to be. And usually nobody was happy with the outcome.
Right.
So I really believe that, I remember hearing Daniel Goleman say one time that when he looks back on his life, if emotional intelligence is a household word, he's done his job. I think about, if I look back on my work, if every organization has a staff mediator as just a regular part of their job, then I've done my job. So I think we need mediation as a real conflict resolution vehicle in organizations that sits outside of HR. That person's job is really just to support people in conflict resolution, and then bringing a restorative justice lens. So restorative justice is a conflict resolution discipline that centers the needs of the harmed person and also supports the person who did the harm in meeting their needs. So if we think about, the conflict that I had with the person who was bullying me, I had a need for truth telling. I needed to understand, why was he doing this? I needed for there to be some level of accountability, that there was a lesson for him in the process and that it wouldn't be done again, and some form of restitution, which very often just looks like an actual apology. What he needed in order to grow as a human being and to leave these behaviors behind is accountability, to be held responsible for his behavior, because there's healing associated with being able to take responsibility for something, and to be accepted back into the community. So what that really ultimately looked like, and he and I were able to go through a very informal restorative justice process. It was just me looking to get my needs met and having a conversation with him. But he did take accountability. He did ultimately tell me why he was doing this. And he did take responsibility for the impact it had had on me. And he did promise to stop, and he did apologize. And we were able to, after 2 years of intense abuse, we were able to move forward in real partnership around the work that we were there to do. So I do think that we need to bring a restorative justice lens. And then I also talk about dialogue circles, bringing dialogue in as a routine part of the work. And when I lead a team, we will normally have an end of week dialogue circle that's designed for knowledge sharing, where were mistakes made, so that we all have opportunities to see those as learning moments, and for relationship building, but being very, very intentional about incorporating dialogue into the culture.
Wonderful. You have given us so much in this very short amount of time, Robin. That the show is listened to by people around the world who are interested in creating workplaces where they actually want to come to work and do their best. We create those inspirational leaders that lead them to their greatness. We do business that betters the world. And say, like 15, 20 seconds, what would you like to leave them with?
Oh, I would just love for people to know that I believe that we are inherently designed to be creators and contributors. We want to do that. And when we create workplaces where people can thrive, organizations thrive.
Sounds good to me. Robin, I am so glad that Conscious Capitalism brought us together. I thank you so much for being on the show and sharing this incredible message and living close enough that I can come scoop you up and take you out for lunch or whatever it is. To be continued for sure. So thank you for being on Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much for having me.
Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about Dr. Robin Short or the work she and her team are doing at the Workplace Peace Institute, go to workplacepeaceinstitute.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on the air with Cynthia Haller-Covey talking about the book she and her late father, Stephen R. Covey, co-authored called Live Your Life in Crescendo. Your best work is always ahead of you. Very uplifting and very inspiring conversation, beautifully rendered as well. Next week, we'll be on the air with Alan Ying and Doug Schneider talking about their new book, The Risk Paradox, Life Lessons from 102 Amazing Risk Takers. And remember, work is an integral and important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.